Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Tholian Web, which is episode 9 of season 3 of Star Trek the Original Series. This video, you would usually say, is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes as determined by my user polls. However, this was not the episode that won the user poll. This is actually the runner-up in the latest user poll. The episode actually won the user poll was Precious Cargo. However, I used my discretion, as it's my channel, and I've said when I started doing these polls that I've reserved the right to use my own discretion in this regard, and decided to instead review the runner-up of the poll, the Tholian Web, which... part of the reason why is because I've been doing a lot of Enterprise reviews recently. I haven't done original series in a very long time, not since I started the polls, so I thought I'd rather review an original series episode. And plus, there are also other reasons why I made this decision, which I will get into at the end of the video. For now, let me jump in to my review of the Tholian Web. So, the Tholian Web was the episode where the Enterprise responds to a distress call from the USS Defiant. They board it, find this crew dead, they killed each other, and that the ship is sort of phasing in and out of existence from this interphasic space. This interferes with them beaming back to the Enterprise, so they all try to beam back, but Kirk stays behind as the final person, and then the ship disappears with him on it. So he is presumed lost in interphasic space. So has Spock, who's now in command, looked for him. The crew start to go mad because apparently the interphasic space is what causes people to go mad, and that's why the Defiant crew killed each other. And on top of that, as he's looking for Captain Kirk, an alien ship known as the Tholians show up and threaten the Enterprise, and their appearances disrupted the interphasic space area, making Kirk all but lost to them. Spock decides to, when the Tholians attack, Spock retaliates, and the Tholians respond by another ship coming, and they form a web, known as the Tholian Web, with energy beams to trap them inside the web, and when the web's completed, they will be destroyed. McCoy eventually finds a cure for the madness, and Spock finds a way to find Kirk and fling the Enterprise and Kirk away from the Tholian Web, and then rescues Kirk, and all is swell. So, this is a pretty classic original series episode. It's probably one of the most well-liked of the third season, because the third season isn't that particularly well-liked. I thought this is interesting. I think there's later, more modern shows, and especially more modern Star Trek shows, would do the A plot, B plot, and sometimes even have a C plot as well. But this is the first time I think an original series really does it. There's like 3 different plots going at the same time. There's a plot with the Tholians trying to destroy the Enterprise. There's a thought with the madness, people going insane, and there's the plot with the interphasic space with Captain Kirk being trapped and people thinking that he's dead. And these plots are actually all related. It's not as, and that's why I really like this episode, because typically I don't like the A plot, B plot thing. Enterprise and Next Generation and Voyager in particular would do this a lot. They'll have like some boring character story, and then they'll have some stupid generic anomaly. Ooh, there's a generic anomaly in the background. I personally hate that. I think that is a really lazy way to write an episode, personally. And I think they kind of structured it off of this episode, but the way this episode does it actually, I think, works. Because in those cases it's very obvious this thing over here and this thing over there. But in this case, they're all sort of interconnected in a web, you might say, because the interphasic space has to do with why Kirk disappeared, also has to do with why people are going mad, and also has to do with why the Tholian ships are attacking, so it's sort of all interconnected. So I actually like the way these three plots combine to tell a great story, because if you had it on its own, and this is the way the Next Generation and Voyager will often do this, where it's just a throwaway wacky anomaly. Oh, there's people falling through the walls, or there's a chaotic space, or some generic throwaway bullcrap that nobody really cares about. They're just watching the episode for Data, kissing this chick, or whatever the personal story happens to be. And I really don't like that. I think that's kind of boring. It's filler, really. They're using it to fill up the runtime. And I could see this plot about there being interfacing space that makes people go mad being like that, being like filler. Like there's this personal story with McCoy and Spock fighting, and then you have in the background there's also this interfacing space with people going crazy. But that's not how it comes off. It doesn't come off like those Next Generation Voyager episodes. It actually blends these two concepts really well, and three concepts, because you have the Tholians as well. And I think mainly that is what makes this episode sort of stick in people's minds, and why it's one of the more memorable episodes of the original series is because of the Tholians. Because they're a very interesting alien that a lot of people, even though they only really made a major appearance in this episode, and they won't be seen again until all the way Enterprise and in Mirror Darkly, which is actually the Mirror Universe. So yeah, I think that's why this episode sticks in people's minds. But I think the other plots with the Kirk missing and the people going crazy, actually what make this episode good. Because if they just hung it on the Tholian Web thing, then that actually wouldn't be enough to make the episode interesting. It would be kind of dull. So I think what makes it a good episode is that it does have these other plots that fill in the gaps and fill in the character stories with Spock and McCoy. So I do really think that this is a good episode, but I do have my issues with it, so I'll get to that shortly. But let me talk about the Tholians, because as I was touched on, the Tholians are a very interesting alien. We don't never really see them again until in the Mirror Darkly, but they're referenced a shit ton. They're referenced a lot in Next Generation. They're referenced a lot in Deep Space Nine. I'm not sure if they're referenced in Voyager at all, but in Enterprise, of course, we just get the appearance in the Mirror Darkly, because it's assumed that they hadn't, at that stage in history, met up with the Tholians. But I was watching this episode to try to see if this was the first encounter with the Tholians, because they did seem kind of unaware of, like, they didn't know they could do the web thingy. That was something that was new. But they never specifically stated that they don't know who the Tholians are. In fact, when Spock first sees the Tholian ship approach, he calls for a red alert. And so you must assume he recognized the ship, he recognized the Tholians as hostile. And when the Tholian introduced himself as the Tholian, he didn't say, "Oh, who are they? Who are these Tholians?" They seem to sort of know who they are already. And more than that, when the Tholian gave him an hour and 53 minutes to respond, and on the time exactly, the Tholian started attacking the Enterprise, so Spock made a note, the renowned Tholian punctuality. Now, he could just be saying, because the guy was punctual, so Spock made that up on the moment. So this must be renowned Tholian punctuality. But I don't think so. The way he said it makes me think like this is something he heard, like he knew that Tholians were known for being punctual. And this is actually, of course, something that will be referenced in later incarnations of Star Trek, because I remember an episode of Deep Space Nine where trying to remember, Cassidy Yates was hanging out with Sisko, and Sisko wanted to do something with her, and she's like, "No, I'm sorry, I'm late for a meeting with a Tholian, and you know how they are about their punctuality." So so that became sort of a running thing. Tholians are punctual. Now, I watched this on Netflix where they had the revised, like the special editions that came out in 2000s with the revised special effects. So the Tholian ship and the web itself looked a lot cooler. I was a bit disappointed, though, that they didn't update the look of the Tholian themselves. They used the same footage they did from the 60s, which was just like a weird sort of psychedelic, I don't know, they just threw colors on the painting. But you kind of got the idea of what they were going for. But we didn't actually see a Tholian proper until the Enterprise episode in Mirror Darkly, which used early 2000s special effects CGI in order to accomplish this. So it was probably the first time they could actually do it in such a way. Even looking at it now, you can say, oh, the CGI is kind of scotty, but it's shabby. But if you look even further, like Next Generation Deep Space Nine Voyager, they wouldn't have been able to do it even that well. So I think that's why they hadn't really shown Tholians before, is because they didn't they were still wanted it to look good. And of course Enterprise also established what the Tholians are, that they exist in extreme heat. It makes me wonder how Tholian can come on board the Enterprise, like they mentioned a Tholian bastard. How can a Tholian bastard, if they breathe like this weird kind of, they don't breathe oxygen, they breathe this weird, I can't remember what it is, but something weird, and they exist in like 900 degrees heat. So I don't know, do they walk around, maybe they walk around in suits or something like that. I don't know, but I'm saying all this because I hope they appear on Discovery. If Discovery, rather than saying, oh, here's Captain Pike, I'd rather see Tholians. Because if it's established here, and it's never like, I'm pretty sure, because people like to bitch about Discovery, I'm pretty sure if we do see Tholians on Discovery, they'll be like, oh, it's canon, this violates canon because the first time we met them on Tholian Web. But I will counter that now, because I just watched the episode. They never specifically stated that this was the first time they met the Tholians, so I think that leaves the door wide open for Tholian introduction. Now, if they do the Tholian Web, then that will be against canon, because this is established the first, because they had no idea what the Tholian Web was. But it doesn't I wouldn't put it past Discovery doing that anyway, because it's what they call skirting canon. They could just make up some excuse, well, this is why, blah blah. So, but I want to see Tholians on Discovery. That's all I'm saying, because especially even now with our updated special effects, they could do the Tholians even better than what Enterprise done. And the Tholians, again, they're something that people have always been interested in, because it's something that struck me right away, because there's a lot of one-off throwaway aliens in the original series, but none of them I've never really attached to as much as the Tholians, because I think they established them as very different. They're not just the four-headed alien that's being all grumpy. They make them very unique, and sort of in a way that makes it feel like they are an established culture. Like the way they talk, I am Commander of the Scoot, and having all the weird like colors and stuff. It's not just a four-headed alien, and the way the ships are like diamond shapes, and they do the Tholian Web. It makes it extremely fascinating, interesting, and that's why a lot of the fan base, like I think there was a lot of novels written about them, and a lot of the fan base wanted to see them more. So I really do hope we see more Tholians in Discovery or any other future Star Trek endeavors. However, getting into the Tholian Web, it's kind of impractical if you think about it. So in the episode, Spock fires the phasers on the Tholian ship, but the Enterprise is disabled, so its engines can't move, but the Tholian ship can't fight back. But another Tholian ship arrives, and so the other Tholian ship gets together with the first one, and they start creating a web. Question: why doesn't the second Tholian ship just destroy the Enterprise? I mean, the first one fired at it normally. Why did the second? And granted, it was disabled from one phaser hit, so maybe they're worried the Enterprise would phaser them again, but wouldn't that worry still exist with the web? Because they were... Sorry. Episode answers my question. They are outside of their phaser range. Sorry. Scratch that. So this answers why they didn't just attack them, because they didn't want to get into phaser range, and they could set up this web from the safety of outside of phaser range, which seems to me would have to be pretty freaking far. But anyway, just answered my own question. So that's why they said. But still, this web seems kind of impractical to me, because it takes forever for them to set this freaking thing up. And of course the Enterprise engines had to be disabled in order for this thing to work, because otherwise they just leave. Okay, see ya. So I don't know. It seems kind of impractical, but I guess it's not the worst thing in the world, because there was a way for them to set it up at a safe distance, because apparently they're very vulnerable to the Enterprise's phasers. But in the Enterprise episode in the Mirror Darkly, we see this is kind of a nostalgia kick. That whole episode was a nostalgia kick. But they have like 12 or whatever Tholian ships, and they like instantly set up a Tholian web that destroys the Enterprise. They probably could have just fired their weapons normally. But that was cool. And I will let them get away with that, because there's 12 ships there, so I'll let them get away that they could create a web much quicker, but with only 2 ships it takes a couple hours, whatever. Anyway, love the Tholians. However, I did have some issues with this episode, as I said, and mostly having to do with the character interactions between Kirk and Spock, because most of this episode is like McCoy's being an unreasonable dick to Spock throughout this episode, and he really pisses me off. Like, okay, so Spock gets into the Tholians stop firing at him, and Scotty is calling from the engine room. He's like, Spock, fire the phasers! What the hell are you doing? We're just sitting there. Fire your fucking phasers! We're being destroyed. Just fire the phasers. And so Spock fires the phasers, and then when he does, McCoy like pitches the biggest hissy fit. He's so stick up his ass. Oh my God, Spock, you fired the phasers. Why did you fire the phasers? Why didn't you just leave? Blah blah blah. I'm like, McCoy, didn't you just hear Scotty like saying you need to fire the phasers or we're dead? I mean, what the fuck? And the whole thing because when they fired the phasers too, that's when they thought that they lost Kirk. So McCoy was actually saying because Spock fired the phasers, that Kirk, that's killed Kirk essentially, but then he degrades Spock for not leaving Kirk behind. He says, "Why didn't you just leave? Because Kirk's gone anyway." And then he degrades Spock, saying, "Oh, you just want to be captain. You just did this because you want to steal the captains from Kirk." I'm like, this logic makes no sense whatsoever. The whole reason Spock stayed is because he thought there was a chance to save Kirk, and he was hoping there'd still be a chance even after he fired with the Tholians, which he had to because they were attacking him. So McCoy is being a dick just for the sake of being a dick, and he even contradicts himself. And I think this is done just for plot convenience, because they want to have this confrontation between McCoy and Spock, and so they just have McCoy be this unreasonable dick for no good reason, and he even like yells at Spock. He turns the chair and like, bah! Gets right up in his face, and he's like a total asshole. I don't know. And they make it clear that he's not being affected by the weird disease thingy that's making people go insane, that he's actually acting normally. So it was just an artificial way to create this, because they wanted to have this tension between them, because they get together and they watch like Kirk's final last words, and Kirk's like, you guys need to work together and blah blah. And once they watch that, they're like, oh, Spock, I'm sorry for being a dick. I shouldn't have been so angry, blah blah. And Spock, to his credit, and I do like this actually, this part of it, Spock doesn't like be his typical dick, well, you're just a stupid human or whatever he normally says. He actually says, I understand, McCoy, if Captain Kirk were here, he'd probably just say, forget it, Bones. Which was awesome. That was a nice, because that showed that not only that McCoy took Kirk's words to heart, that Spock did too, and that he was willing to work with McCoy, which actually is really big of him, considering how big of a dick McCoy was being to him. I mean, my God. But I think that's what the plot was going for, and I think the way they did it didn't quite work. It didn't really make sense, because it had McCoy acting unreasonably in order to accomplish this. But also, let me get to Kirk's message, which is another thing I had a bit of an issue with, because, all right, I mean, this is a bit obvious. I mean, this is early, the late 60s or whatever, because it's showing its age. But Kirk message, like, this is a message that in the case of his death, they're supposed to watch this message. And when they watch the message, the first thing he says is, well, I assume, as you're watching this, I'm dead, so I assume that you're in a mortal situation, the stakes are high, and you're in a combat situation. I'm like, why would you make that assumption? I mean, if you're already dead, I would say the assumption would be this combat situation has already been resolved. I mean, you probably were killed and then they won the combat and now they're reading your thing. It doesn't really make sense that they'd still watch it if they're in the middle of the combat. And also he assumes that Kirk and Spock, that McCoy and Spock would be at each other's throats. And well, of course, that would turn out to be true, but how would he assume that would be the case? I mean, how did he know that they'd die? Maybe his death had absolutely nothing to do with the battle combat situation. Maybe he died from some very super fast STD that he got from banging so many alien chicks. I actually think that's more likely than, wouldn't that be ironic if he died from like an STD and they were watching this thing and it's like, you're in a combat situation, and they're like, oh my god. That would have been funny. But anyway, so that was a bit dumb, but overall I did really enjoy this episode. Okay, so one more thing I want to talk about that I forgot to mention before is this episode actually is probably one of the most referenced original series episode in Star Trek Discovery. It's kind of making more reference to In the Mirror Darkly, which continues this, because for those of you who haven't seen either, the writers of Enterprise often watched this episode, Tholian Web, one of their favorite episodes, and they often wondered what happened to the Defiant. For me, I didn't wonder that. It seemed like it just disappeared into this interphasic space. And it's hard for me watching this episode to imagine that this interphasic space that these things are slipping into is the past of the Mirror Universe. So it's like 100 years in the past, but in the Mirror Universe. I don't know. I think that's a bit of a leap to say that's where the ship went to, but alright, whatever. We'll go with that. But anyway, it's mentioned a lot in Discovery because it's actually used as the sort of ploy that, I don't want to give away spoilers for Discovery for those of you who haven't seen it. But I'm going to tread slightly on the spoilers, so if you haven't seen Discovery, you might want to skip this part. But anyway, they use, when they get stuck in the Mirror Universe, Captain Lorca uses it as a ploy, saying, let's find out what happened to Defiant, and so he uses that to keep them in the Mirror Universe, because he knows damn well what happened to the Defiant, but he needs a ploy in order to keep them in the Mirror Universe. So Michael Burnham goes on this huge mission to find out what happened to the Defiant, and it's like several episodes until she finally finds out from the Emperor in the Mirror Universe that it's impossible. She can't use the same method because they want to find a way back to the Prime Universe. So that's why she's trying to find out what happened to the Defiant. But of course, once they find out, it happened to it was interphasic space that makes people go insane and kill each other. So that is a direct reference to this episode. In fact, I saw a review for that Discovery episode, and they were like, they were treating it like this is huge revelation. But actually, when I first saw that, I was like, yeah, of course. I should have actually realized this, because anyone who's seen the Tholian Web will know that the interphasic space makes people go insane. In fact, in this episode, they mentioned it several times that it's the space itself that makes people go crazy. So if you go all the way, to the other side, then you're going to go insane. But then again, Kirk was floating around in interphasic space and he didn't go insane, but I guess because it's Kirk. So I'm not sure if that way is completely off limits. So it ends up being a red herring. Not to spoil Discovery too much, but they don't actually use it to get home. They use something else which I pretty much knew. It was just a sort of a red herring because it was a dead end, because they couldn't actually use it to get home because it makes people go crazy. And again, I have a hard time when watching Tholian Web, seeing it as a portal to the Mirror Universe. And it's the Mirror Universe in the past, by the way, because it takes it back to Enterprise times. But anyway, so my rating for the Tholian Web out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. It was a very effective episode. Stands out the most, though, because of the Tholians. This episode probably would be a bit more throwaway if it wasn't for the Tholians, who were a very interesting introduction to the aliens, which we, in all, how many years over, was it been? Almost 50 years or whatever? We barely gotten any. We need more Tholians. God damn it. Anyway, but there were a lot of issues with this episode as well, such as the McCoy and Spock conflict being really fake, and McCoy being really annoying in this episode. That really bothered me. And plus, there's every episode has a coda of the original series where they go, "Ha ha, we saved it," and they have sort of a little joke. The one in this episode was really particularly bad. McCoy and Spock tried to act like they never read the recording, which doesn't really make any sense. And why would Kirk assume that they watched it in the first place? I mean, how did he know they thought he was dead? How did he know that they were... But anyway, off topic. So this episode wasn't perfect, but a strong entry, so I'll give it an 8. So now it is time for me to do the next poll, next pick. So I want to get into more detail now. So if you're just here for the Tholian Web review, you can bail out now. So I'm going to get into more detail about why I decided to go ahead and choose the runner-up of the last poll rather than the winner. And that's because I highly suspect that the poll numbers were artificially inflated. I don't know this for certain with a 100% certainty, but I'm very highly suspicious that there was 1 or 2 users who have multiple accounts who were using it to vote multiple times. By multiple accounts, I don't mean 2 or 3, I mean 15. And of course, I have no way of being 100% certain on this, but I would say I'm about 90% sure that this is the case. I won't get into the details on why I think this is the case, but just suffice to say, I really highly do believe this is the case. And if that is the case, then I don't think that's particularly fair, not just to me, but to you, the viewers, because that means because the whole idea of doing these polls is to have some interaction with my viewership, and so those watching these videos can have some say in which episode I'm going to review next. And it doesn't really work if it's just one person who thinks he's clever, who has multiple accounts, who's deciding each and every poll. I don't personally think that's particularly fair. So that actually makes me sort of question doing these polls at all. And because I suspected that it was Precious Cargo, and I want to be clear, it's not that I didn't want to review Precious Cargo. I actually had some things, I didn't want to watch it, but I had some things to say about it, so I wouldn't mind reviewing. But I actually had to disqualify it because I really suspected that its numbers were being artificially inflated, and I just don't think that's fair. So that does make me question what I'm going to do, because I would still like my viewership to be involved, but I don't want every episode I'm going to do next decided by one person. So what I'm going to try is, rather than doing the poll on YouTube, I'm going to put a link to this polling site that I used before for a Game of Thrones video, where I'll create a poll on this website. It's called Straw Poll. It's all about creating polls, and they have a filter that is meant to prevent people from voting more than once. Now, it's probably not foolproof, but I'll give it a go, see if this works sometimes, and hopefully that will be the case. But if if it's not the case, and I suspect that's being tampered with as well, I might have to give up on the polls entirely and just choose the episodes myself, which I'd rather not do. I'd rather have you guys involved. And again, I do apologize, because I do know there were a lot of people who did legitimately want me to review Precious Cargo, and I do apologize for you. In fact, I'm not certain, I can't be certain, even with the tampering, that it didn't win the poll anyway. It might have gotten more votes than Tholian Web legitimately, but that's just the decision I came to. And plus, as I said at the front of the video, I've done enough Enterprise reviews recently. I wanted to do an original series review. So anyway, I'm going to choose 5 random things as by my poll, as I have been doing for the past couple of times. But this time, instead of having the poll in the corner, it's going to be in a link in the description below to the Straw Poll website, where you can go there and vote for the poll. And I'll try this for a while and see what if this works. But anyway, let me get to choosing our options for the next poll. Okay, so let's choose the next option for the poll, starting with our original series option, which is going to be Who Mourns for Donis? A powerful being claimed to be Greek god Apollo appears and demands that the crew and Enterprise disembark onto the planet to worship him. Yeah. I used to love this episode, but now I just think it's a bit silly. So, I don't know. You can choose that if you want for the original series option. Move on to our next generation option, which is going to be A Matter of Honor. Well, I was just talking about this episode when I reviewed Sins of the Father, so I'm not going to read that whole synopsis. It looks pretty big. But this is Season 2, Episode 8. It's when Riker goes aboard a Klingon ship as an exchange program. It's a good early Klingon episode. I had some issues with it. It had that cheese factor from the second season, but probably one of the better second season episodes, although that's not saying a lot, but it was decent. Alright, so Deep Space Nine, getting to our Deep Space Nine option. Change of Heart. I love this episode. This is one of my favorite romance episodes. I put in my romance top 10. Worf and Dash travel to the Badlands to procure some information on the Dominion from a traitorous Cardassian. Bashir wants to engage in a holosuite spy simulation, but O'Brien prefers to brush up on his Tango game, watching Jadzia lose to Quark. Well, I don't know why you mentioned that subplot, and because I guess that subplot is not that important. It's more about Worf and Dax and what happens to them. I guess I didn't want to be too spoilery, but those who seen the episode knows what happens. Great. This is like one of my favorite emotional romance stories. It's probably my favorite Worf and Dax. So I wouldn't mind reviewing that one at all. Okay, so next we get into the Voyager option, which is Tuvix, but I've already reviewed it, so thank God I don't have to fucking talk about this episode anymore. Okay, so I'm going to choose another option. Tuvix. The Cloud! Oh, great. A throwaway, generic first season episode with probably was something I was just talking about, how there's this stupid anomaly bullshit thingy, blue, and dumb. This is probably the key example of why I don't like this kind of story. So if you want me to elaborate more on why I don't like the A plot, B plot with some boring character story and then some stupid anomaly bullshit, then you can vote for The Cloud. Okay, so next, let's choose the Enterprise option, and we'll do this the old-fashioned way with the number generator 1 through 4. This will be Season 4, 22, Episode 11. Have a look, see what that corresponds to. Oh my god, this is the worst mouse ever. I think it's time for a new mouse. Finally got it. Okay. Season 4, Episode 11 is The Observer Effect, which I've already reviewed. Yeah, someone requested that one, I believe, but that was one of my favorite Enterprise episodes, so have to select another one. Alrighty, go. Season 3 this time. Okay, dokes. Season 3, I believe there's 24 episodes in Season 3. Episode 17. Okay, so let us do Season 3. Episode 17, which is Hatchery. Yeah, I didn't like this episode. I like most of Season 3. I think most of Season 3 and the Xindi story arc was good, but there are a couple of filler episodes they had in order to fill out because they had 24 episodes. I think the season might have been a bit better if they had shortened it to a shorter season, 16 episodes. Because it was 24, they had to have some silly throwaway episodes. This one in particular was quite dumb. So if you want to hear me elaborate on that, then you can choose the Hatchery. So those are your options. You can vote in the poll by following the link in the description below. Please only vote once. Be respectful to your other viewers. please. And I will be back to review the winner in, I think, about a week. Maybe, no, 2 weeks. I'll be back in 2 weeks to review the winner of the poll. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for many more Star Trek reviews, as well as other reviews on shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Babylon 5, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.